Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, both here in the room with us, and here we have a sizable audience watching us on our live stream, so want to acknowledge them as well. My name is Megan Hoyer. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Academic Engagement here at the Whitney, and I'm just delighted to welcome you to Hand in Hand, AI, Art, and Creativity. So this program, which hopefully you all know, is organized in conjunction with the exhibition Harold Cohen, Erin, which is currently on view on the 8th floor here at the Whitney through May 19th. And the exhibition traces the evolution of the artist Harold Cohen's Erin, the earliest artificial intelligence, or AI, program for art making. As Christiane Paul and David Lisbon write in their description of the exhibition, Cohen understood his work with Erin to be a collaboration, and he devoted his life to exploring the potential of artificial intelligence to translate an artist's knowledge and process into code. It's this idea of collaboration between artist and machine that inspires tonight's conversation. We have an extraordinary group of artists with us tonight who are all creating with different forms of AI and generating very different kinds of artwork. They each, in their respective practices, explore how AI can enable new forms of creativity and artistic agency, while they also address its corporate structures and critical blind spots of the critical blind spots of current technologies. I want to thank Christiane and David Lisbon, who organized, as I said, the Harold Cohen exhibition and were wonderful collaborators in the development of tonight's conversation. So what's going to happen tonight is that Christiane will begin with an overview of AI art, as I understand it, but she'll tell you more and take us through from Harold Cohen to set up the conversation, and then she'll introduce the artists and they'll each speak briefly about their current projects, and that will be followed by a discussion with the group, moderated by Christiane. We've reserved some time for questions at the end from you, our audience, so also stay with us for that. And I want to also say we can take some questions from our online audience, so I'll be back to share some of those at the end. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and please, Christiane, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Megan, and thanks to everyone for coming tonight. And the clicker is acting up, so I could get some help with that. Yeah. Thank you so much. As Megan mentioned, I will give a brief overview of AI art that you so often hear about, and it's actually a quite confusing territory. So now we're on. Thank you so much, and sorry about that. So we'll start.
Give us a shot here before I go away, and you can make sure it's working.
Again? Yeah. Okay, so I'm sure you all heard a lot about AI art in the mainstream media, and usually it's a very polarized discussion or assessment, as so many discussions today are. So either today's text-to-image models, AI systems, replace artists with their marvelous creations, or they are, as Jason Farago put it in the Times, insta-kitsch image engines that are mirrors of our diminished expectations when it comes to art and culture, producing images characterized by highly symmetrical composition, extreme depth of field, and sparkly and radiant edges that pop on backlit smartphone screens. And my guess is that both of these camps would take this image as proof of that. Jason Allen's creation via Midjourney that actually won the Colorado State Art Fair. So it's a very divided field, and what is less discussed is the more critical engagement or aesthetically refined engagement with AI technologies in AI art. And I want to start with a brief definition. AI art as an art in which concepts related to AI technologies are enacted through practical engagement, and art that is rooted in a critical conceptual and structural employment of artificial intelligence, meaning that art that just uses AI tech as a tool for some effect in an image, for example, or art that narrativizes AI technologies without really using them would be a different category. I don't want to criticize that use, but it would be very different. It's also important to keep in mind that AI has a long history of being the next big thing. We have seen 2 AI winters. We're currently definitely in an AI summer. The field was conceptualized in the 1950s. The term was also coined by McCarthy in the 50s, although Alan Turing already wrote about it much earlier. And I do not want to dwell too much on this rather complicated diagram, but when we're talking about AI art and creativity, we really have to consider how the technologies have changed and how artists have creatively engaged with them. The early stage of AI was symbolic AI, so-called expert systems that worked on the basic of logic. And what we're looking at right now are statistical AI paradigms that really work with big data, huge image sets that are trained and associated with text. So a completely different type of technology. Megan already gave a little introduction to Harold Cohen's Aaron, and I don't want to deeply get into it. But what Cohen did was pretty amazing. He really wrote his expert system from scratch and developed it through the decades, starting out with presentations of simple shapes. They became more complicated with perspective over time. Then came a phase of figurative drawings in more sophisticated space, and then really a fully three-dimensional knowledge base. And before we were seeing flora without figures. So the Whitney has 2 of the AI softwares of Cohen from a later point, from 2001 and 2007, in its collection, which are running live in the galleries. Once again, I hope you have seen them, and if not, there's also a lot of documentation online. And if we're looking at something like Aaron Gijon, for example, the Aaron software has a knowledge base. It understands how plants grow, how flowers branch. It also has a sophisticated knowledge of color composition. And that is what you see playing out here. In the figurative gallery, we also have the KCAT software running that was commissioned by Ray Kurzweil and also released as a screensaver. So once again, Aaron having knowledge of external objects in the world and internal knowledge of visual representation. The range may be limited, it's people, it's flowers, but it's a system that has been written from scratch. And for the first time since the 90s, we're also showing this plotting live in the galleries. And what is also very essential to Cohen's work here is that he deeply believed in intentionality for something to be art. He started with the so-called freehand line algorithm that makes it look like everything is drawn by hand. And it's this intentionality of the line that for Cohen also makes this art. I want to go through some of the developments in AI art, and I'm going to be intentionally biased here. There would be hundreds of artists I could reference in this AI art history, and I'm just going to pick a few of them that actually have shown at the Whitney or whose work we have in the collection, even if that is not exactly the work you're looking at right now. So one of the landmark pieces was David Rokeby's The Giver of Names, a system in which you place an object onto a pedestal, then a vision system reads it, describes it, and then a database trained on literature actually arrives at statements about it. And this was done in 1990, but what it really nicely makes obvious is this process of abstraction and perception and how vision and language work together in a system. The 90s also were a time of a lot of chatbot art. Lynn Hirschman-Leeson's Agent Ruby, which she released in connection with her film Technolust, starring Tilda Swinton, was one of these earlier chatbots developed at the same time as Richard Wallace's Alice system. You also see Tilda Swinton's face here that emotes as Ruby speaks. And the conversations with Ruby have been collected by SF MoMA over time. Here they are exhibited in binders. And of course, these types of chatbot systems have continued. One example being Stephanie Dinkins, not the only one, which is a sculptor and chatbot that deliberately trained only a very limited data set of one African-American family. And we're going to hear more about the use of small data sets tonight, so radically different experience from something like Siri, for example. And then in 2014, we have a major game changer with GANs and Ian Goodfellow developing the GAN technology, which then quickly infiltrated art. And you may have read about this portrait of Edmund Bellamy that sold at Christie's for $430,000, and the work was created by a French collective of computer science students, actually. This nicely illustrates the imitation game and begs the question why we need AI to replicate existing styles and what the point of that might be. But GANs really created a new era of AI art. So as generative adversarial networks, GANs are almost kind of a little built-in Turing test. So you have a training set of images, you task the AI software with creating something, the generator creates, and a discriminator evaluates whether it basically is good enough and continuously evolves it. And at least one of the artists you'll hear from tonight also used GANs in the creation of their work. At the Whitney, we commissioned Devin Kenny's work, Ongoing Individual Adaptability, or How to Quiet Quit, a piece in which he trained a GAN on all of the Whitney's installation images over the decades, and then combined those with excerpts from the Whitney's archive to reflect on basically the power structures of AI and a museum as an institution. The next major shift we saw was pre-trained transformation, the release of GPT-1 in 2018. And I just put in this slide to demonstrate the enormous growth of the data sets and parameters. So GPT-1 had 170 million parameters. GPT-4, released in 2023, has 1.76 trillion. So these are the models we're looking at now. And once again, we also commissioned for the Whitney a piece based on GPT. The next biennial should be curated by a machine, by Ubermorgen, Leonardo Impet, and Joshua Cruiser, in which the AI system is continuously curating biennials. In 64 universes, it's writing its curatorial statements and its press reviews. And this was by no means done to suggest that AIs are terrific at curating biennials, but what the system does is really take a close look at curatorial language and at the echo chamber of the art world. So switching to today, the latest game changer were text-to-image models that many of the artists today are using. Once again, very different system in that these systems are trained on massive data sets of images associated with text, and through text prompts, you generate images. And I would suggest that this really leads to a new transmediality in this fusion of text and image. So it's transtextual, it's transvisual, it operates across and beyond media specificity, mashing up media and systems. So the commonly used ones today are DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, and Midjourney. And I just want to close by referencing Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst's piece X Harry Mutant X that is part of the Whitney Biennial, and you can take a look at part of it, prints, in the galleries on the 6th floor, and you can interact with it on Artport, curated by Meg Onley and Chrissy Isles with support from David Lisbon and Colin Brooks. And here the artists basically created an extension to the Stable Diffusion model that makes every prompt or inserts Holly Herndon's image and model into every prompt, basically reinforcing an artist's identity within those data sets that have been massively trained on other artists' imagery. So here, no matter what you do, if it's a QWERTY keyboard, it will come out with Holly's locks and have that signature style. And I'm going to end it here, just providing some background of the changes and history, and hand it over to Mimi. Try it one more time. Yeah. Cool. Do one more and go back.
Okay. Is this on? Hi, everyone. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here. It's a Wednesday, right? Great. Yeah, it's a Wednesday night. It means a lot that all of you have come out here. Your time is the most important thing you have, so thank you. And thank you for that introduction. Really lovely. Okay. All right, let me see. I want to start with a little bit of grounding for me, maybe for you, maybe for all of us, at least for me. So I'm going to do it through a piece. My name is Mimi Ọnụọha, by the way. There's actually two pieces that I made. This is an video and an accompanying installation. The video is called These Networks in Our Skin. The installation is called The Cloth and the Cable. And the way that this works, this is taken from a film. I'm going to show a little teaser in the background, although it's not going to have the part that I'm talking about because it's a teaser. You got to go see it. So in this film, there are these four women, and they are cutting open these internet cables. And they're cutting them open, and they're lacing these cables with hair, with cloth, with spices, with earth, with all of these materials that have cultural significance for me and my own culture. And these cables that they're cutting into, they are meant to represent internet cables, the internet cables that, surround the world under land, under sea, like a great circulatory system. And the reason why they are doing this is because there is something in the video that I'm trying to suggest about how they are not affecting the information itself that is within the cables, but they are affecting how that information is structured. And that there's something there that I want to hold for this conversation about how it's not just about the models, but about the structures that act on the models. And so in my work, what I'm going to explain, what I'm going to talk about, I'm talking about things I'm doing with a large project I've been working on with AI, but also about what structures the model that I'm making in the first place. I'm gonna jump there. Okay, so let's get to the project. Also, that tells you, I showed you, that was what you saw before. This is a finished work. Now I'm gonna talk about something that's in progress, but you should see I know how to finish a work. I'm just talking now about something that I don't have all the footage for. So I've been working for a few years on a very interesting, to me, machine learning model that predicts something I think is kind of surprising. So I'll give you the background. This is a project that's called Ground Truths. I'll tell you I'll do a little spoiler. I'm predicting locations of graves, hidden graves in the US. And the background for this is that I grew up in, let me go back. I think we'll see if this video works. But I grew up outside of Houston. And a few years ago, I think it's 2018, in this town, Sugar Land, that I grew up in, there was a local school district. They were trying to build a new school. As they were building the school, they dug new ground. They were digging ground for it, and they found these remains. And they found these remains of 95 people who later they discovered it was 95 black people who had died through this practice called convict leasing. Convict leasing, I don't have time to go into it really deeply because I only have 5 minutes, but it is essentially the racist labor practice that evolved after slavery across the US, and is really what I would say our incarceration system really it ties back to convict leasing. Anyway, so I grew up, this hidden grave was located about 5 minutes away from my house in Texas, and I had no idea that it existed, even though I drove by it every single day. Is this gonna? No, it's not. Okay. There should be a video, but just you can look at me instead. So I drove by it every day, but I didn't know it existed. And it turned out, what I learned later was that actually there had been people who had spoken about this grave. But they had spoken to the school district, but the school district had dismissed them and had basically tried to quiet them. And it was only when digging ground for the new school, when they found the remains, that they were like, okay, I guess we have to acknowledge that this is real. And it really messed with me, honestly. I couldn't stop thinking about this. Again, I told you I drove by this hidden grave all the time. And I thought about what it meant that all of a sudden these remains could be a form of evidence. And then I started thinking, well, where else in the US are there similar graves just like this? And they were only able to have this conversation in a wider way because you could dig for it and because we could find it. But in most places, you probably wouldn't be able to do that. And so I thought, well, I wish there was a way. What if there was a technology you could use to predict other places that are likely to have this? Turns out there is. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called AI. What I'm doing in this project is I'm building this machine learning model that is meant to predict other locations of hidden mass graves in the US. And this is a really intense process. I've been doing this since 2019. This is like a chart that kind of talks about on the surface what the process involves. And I've been working with statisticians, with research aides. It's taken a long time because a lot of the models that we talk about today around AI, a lot of these generative models, they're pre-trained, they're scooping up lots of data, is very different when you are creating the data yourself for the model, or when you have to beg people for the data, as I've had to do, when you're not just the one cleaning and analyzing it, but you're actually going to people and saying, like, can we have this? Is this here? I think I would compare it to growing your own food and then cooking versus going to the grocery store and getting ingredients and then cooking, So we're trying to grow our own food to make this. And what has been really interesting about it is that it has forced us to see the limitations. I'm betting that many of you had never heard about convict leasing before I spoke about it. And that absence shows up in the data. That absence is everywhere when we are trying to create the data sets that we use for this model. And so the model holds all of that. And as a result, that kind of question, there's something, the artfulness of this piece has to do with the impossibility of the model itself. And what I mean when I say that is that this is a model that is mathematically sound, it is accurate, it will be reliable. Working with statisticians, we are making sure of that. But at the same time, the question is, what does it tell us? We'll never be able to dig in any of these places. What it will tell us about these places, it will tell us the counties that are likely to have these graves. But like all of these models, there's this interpretability, this question of interpretability. What does that really mean? It tells us a likelihood, but what do you do with a likelihood? These are the questions that I'm really interested in. And this is, for me, part of what this, like the art of making this piece is this question. This is impossible. And it takes us back to the same question that I mentioned before. It takes us to, I think about the forces that act on these models. The boat, I think of like AI as like the boat, but then there's a current that's under it. And in this project, it's like the more I work on the boat, the more I learn about the currents that are pushing it somewhere. So this will eventually be a film that will come out in 2025. This tells about all of this process. So that's another place where the artfulness comes in, is in telling the story about what it means to work on this model. And I have a lot more I could say, but I'm going to leave it at that. Pass it on.
Thanks so much.
Oh, wait, you have the
Okay. First of all, thanks so much, Mimi. And the location change threw me off, and I forgot to introduce you. So I'll do it after the fact, you know. So Mimi Ọnụọha is a Nigerian-American artist whose work deploys choice moments of seeming absence to question and expose contradictory logics of technological progress. Mimi has worked a lot on missing data sets, and you can also see one of her works on Artport, the Whitney Museum's platform for web-based art. And we're moving on to Bennett Miller, an Academy Award-nominated director whose current work in visual art links the emergence of AI with the history of the photographic image. So we're switching to a different media. Take it away, Bennett.
Thank you, everybody. Just a couple of words about how I came to this. I had been working on a documentary film about the emergence of technology, the powers that we're creating that will transform the landscapes of our lives. And I began working on this in 2015 and interviewed all sorts of people, from Sam Altman to Tom Stopper to Marilyn Williams. And 5 years, well over 100 interviews, including really pretty much all of the tip of the spear leaders in the myriad branches of technology. And the idea is that this is a very extraordinary moment. The pace of change, the magnitude of the transformations that are upon us, for many reasons, but one of them because of technology. And I thought it was a good opportunity to hit pause with a film and just ask the 101 questions, you know, what is a good life and what is a better world? As we're gaining the powers to create and do anything, what is it that we're aiming for? And well, as it happens sometimes in film, there was a dispute. Lawyers, and the film got frozen, and I'm hoping that it will, you know, be liberated at some point. It would be very nice to have out. But as it was falling apart or getting frozen, the folks at OpenAI, and I'd spent a lot of time with them and interviewed Sam Altman for several hours, offered me access to the original model of DALL-E, which is OpenAI's, you know, text-to-image. This is a few years ago, before it had been released, and said, would you give us some notes? And from the day they gave it to me, I basically hit pause on everything else, and this has become a full-time thing, working on the still image. So, immediately amazed by the power and the seeming imagination of this stuff, my interest sort of went back to some kind of an imagined past of around the origins of photography, and also about the time when technology began changing at such a pace that people would have to adapt within their lifetimes to changes that were brought by technology. This is a very recent thing, about 175 years. Before that, aqueducts would come, they'd change the world, but you had hundreds of years to adapt. Now, things are happening at an incredible pace. This is an image that puts us back in this time. And these end up being prints of images that are made with the original DALL-E. And I should say that what they have in common is that they emerge from this similar sense that the change that is upon us is a very hard thing to feel. And we can get awfully caught up in the moment and I thought, as things are changing, what can we not remember, what is lost? And these end up being kind of meditations on that which is beyond the reach of memory, that which you cannot know, how much of humanity is past. This particular one is a little bit of a meditation on human intelligence. You know, we can figure out how to pull a whale out of the ocean and put it on a stage, and you know, but why? And there's something in the character of that. So none of these could really be confused for actual images, photographs from the time. They all share some kind of unusual, surreal elements, which for me end up being some kind of an emblem to, you know, the I don't know, that which we cannot know. And anyway, this is what they are born out of. As I said, they are used to make prints. So this is last week. We're doing a special commission of this one here, which was printed on canvas, the original that showed in the show of a couple months ago with Gagosian is different substrate. But this is what those felt like in the space. And maybe we'll just leave it there for the moment.
Okay. Thank you so much. All right, our next presenter is David Salle, who is a painter and writer who hardly needs any introduction. His work is represented in collections around the world, and he more recently also started using AI in the creation of his paintings in very different ways.
Is this on? I don't think it's on.
Yeah.
It is? Okay. First of all, I want to say that I'm just an image maker. I'm not a, deeply invested in technology in any conceptual or practical way, really. I know very little about it. Don't ask me any questions about how things are done algorithmically because I have no idea. But I'm using this technology almost as a kind of found object, or found, if a process can be a found object. And I think the impetus for doing so stems from a very simple phenomena that many artists have, since the beginning of time, have experienced, which is simply the desire to get outside of one's own head, to get beyond what you can know just by confronting yourself and the blank canvas, but somehow is still linked to one's own artistic DNA. And people have tried so many different ways of doing this, and it seemed to me, I don't know really why, maybe it wasn't even appropriate, but it seemed to me when I was first introduced to the technology that this was a more powerful means to take a range of imagery which one has more or less authored and subject it to the forces of chance, break it down, deconstruct it, reconstruct it, pulverize it on a kind of almost granular molecular level, and see what's left, see what can be. Is there some identity that is still intact after this technological pulverization? That was sort of the inquiry. Not that I would have put it in those kinds of terms. It's just like all of us seeing this thing, one's response is, "Oh, that's cool. What can we do with it?" So we set out to find out. I was working with an engineer, artist named Grant Davis, who's a wonderful guy, who sort of intuitively figured out what I was going for, and he was already working on a product that was synchronous with this, what I wanted to do, but he more or less custom made this, or pushed this thing in a direction that was more appropriate for me. So that's one starting point. The other starting point is having, for no particular reason, no good reason anyway, looked at a lot of digital art, because I thought I had to, or that I should, looking at a lot of NFTs and whatnot. I approached the whole field from the standpoint almost at a pedagogical level. Like, what's wrong with these images? All these images are bad. Why? What's missing? What is it that the machine doesn't know? Because the machine only knows what we tell it. What has it not been taught? Then we sort of, and I say we because I'm including Grant in this process, we had the idea to really break it down and try to take the machine to art school and teach the machine, because, well, back up. What is it that the AI-generated images, and of course I'm wildly generalizing, and if I'm dead wrong about some individual's work, I apologize, but in the main, what one notices is the machine has a terrible time with edges. It doesn't recognize an edge as having any particular significance because everything is read equally with equal emphasis. So the very nature of a pixelated screen is its total differentiated aspect, which is in a way the opposite of painting. So how do you take this thing which is scanning equally and get it to scan with particularity and with emphasis? So we just started showing it stuff that I thought it should know, the way you'd work with anybody. Someone would say, what should I look at? Whose work should I look at? You make a list. So we sent the thing to school. We showed it kind of an amalgam of artists who not just that I liked them, but I thought they were exemplary in the way they handled space, form, line, edge, et cetera, et cetera. And it was an interesting amalgam of artists, Curator, Edward Hopper, not just, again, because I liked them, but because they served a purpose. The images started to become interesting. We're getting warmer. But there was something that the machine still lacked, sense of drama, sense of pictorial structure. And I almost accidentally hit on the idea, or maybe, I can't remember if I was looking at a book or it just came to me like in a dream. I realized that Arthur Dove, who's very well represented in the Whitney collection, although not very well known to people after a certain age group, Arthur Dove being really one of the great stars of the Stieglitz 291 generation, even if today he's obscure, he was a master at orchestrating a flowing black form. This is probably boring you to death, I'm sorry, this is so much not tech speak. This kind of flowing black form that flowed through the compositions, and that's what's been missing. So we added Arthur Dove to the training model, And it was the secret sauce that unlocked all kinds of magic. And I'm going to show you some images. So these next few are made, I can't remember what the prompts are. There are some prompts that were derived from poems by Ben Lerner. Doesn't really matter what they are. But this one, which I think was the most successful, has a very Francis Picabia aspect to it. And I thought I would make paintings of these, and I have yet to do so. But it was a point on the road. This one looks like it could have been. It looks like art today in a way. And this one as well sort of has a Forrest Bess aspect to it. And I don't know where these things came from in the terms of how the machine took apart the training model and then recombined it into these components, but all I knew is that it was getting to be pretty good. It was starting to learn something about form. But I still didn't think they were distinctive enough or didn't have any particular relationship to me or to my body of work. So we started over again, creating a new training model that was focused exclusively on my work, but also just a very, very tiny subset of my work. And that was a group of paintings I made about 25 years ago, called the Pastoral Series, doesn't really matter. And it's the reason I thought it might be appropriate to train the machine on, because the image is broken down into very discrete, interlocking shapes of color, almost like puzzle pieces that can be easily scanned and read, and they almost invite a recombinatory kind of thinking. Also, each painting has several distinct color palettes operating simultaneously. I thought it would give the machine a leg up on its color harmonies. And also, the paintings have a great amount of detail, but the detail is subsumed into the whole in a way which I thought might be also interesting. So this is, the training model included these paintings, maybe only 10 or 12 altogether. But there was still a problem. This is another one. And the problem was the machine did not have any sense of how to make a mark. What's the first thing you do when you pick up a brush? What's the quality of the mark, the quality of the line? So we included these works, which are more recent, in the training model, hoping that it would focus the machine's attention, if that's the right word, on the actual quality of a mark as it's used to create an edge, as it's used to create a form. These things were folded into the model. Then we got some outputs. The device that Grant invented, it does not rely on verbal prompts. There's no verbal prompts here. The prompts are simply a continuum with similar on one end and dissimilar on the other end. So depending upon where we set the dial, set the lever on the similar-dissimilar continuum, the results look more or less like the paintings they're derived from. So this is and so these were, hundreds of these were generated. I think they're all amazing, incredible. Then the question, well, what the hell do you do with them? Are they art as they are, as is? Or are they something on a path to art? Don't know. There's another one. And after trying for months to literally to recreate them as paintings, like to find a paint equivalent to those kinds of shapes and marks, and even though the AI shapes and marks are themselves interpretations of painted marks and shapes, at this point, they're so complicated, it's hard to paint them. After many failures, I realized what these really are backgrounds, in the same way that the pastoral image itself 25 years ago had been a background for other things. So we had them printed on canvas, and then I started painting on them the way I would on any kind of surface. So these are the finished products. This is about, I believe, 8 feet across, give you a sense of scale. And what I like about it, and this is so formal and so purely painterly, it might really interest no one here, but what I like about it from a painter's point of view is that the integration of painted form and printed form, the printed form itself, as I said, is already derived from painted form. There's a kind of seamless reciprocity, which is cool. And the energy of the digital crenellations and kind of accordion folds and interior folds gives the painting a kind of energy that it would not have been able to do any other way. So you can see we retained some of the sense of landscape. And that's the one that was kind of closest to the model. I think that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, David. Our final presenter is Beth Coleman, an artist and writer who works across locations of text, sound, and visuality and plays with frequencies of generative aesthetic. Her recent exhibition and book, Reality Was Whatever Happened, Octavia Butler, AI and Other Possible Worlds, explores the potential of AI for generative reconfigurations.
Thanks, Christiane. So I see your plot in putting us all together. Oh, David, I'm supposed to forward it? Okay. I don't know, it's nice. All right. Okay. So I think what I did was I set out to break the machine. I'm very happy to see Bennett's work, because when I encountered early Dolly productions, I just thought, we're all gonna die, and we're all gonna die of boredom, because this is awful. And so what's the story? Like, I didn't have to take a GAN engine, and thank you, Christiane, for explaining what it is. No, I don't have to. But I thought, okay, here's a space where I can actually pull the levers. And one of the things that increasingly we're going to in terms of how AI is developed is it's shut. And you've heard a lot of language about black boxes, but for different reasons. It's more and more shut in terms of what we can move. And I think it's, so my desire to break the machine was, okay, so if this particular form is meant to, statistically speaking, create a norm, to produce the most normal of norms, like as if we could aggregate all your faces and there was a norm, and then that would be the best output. And for me, that would be the worst output. I want something that will actually deal with the edges of what we haven't seen yet. I know that's a risky thing to say, or what could be. So I was thinking about Octavia Butler, who's a speculative fiction writer, and she had this idea in the Xenogenesis series that the Earth might come to an end as we know it because environmentally it's destroyed because of people. I know, crazy idea. And that the only way for humans to survive is to actually build kinship with aliens. So I was thinking about what happens if we take an engine that produces the normal, and then we say, I'm going to do a series of portraits. And since I don't know what aliens look like, I was looking at animals, birds, some other things to think about what can portraiture be in that space. And because the lines were so, David's going to kill me, but soft, I was like, oh, I see. This can't stay digital. This has to go out into the world in some other type of state. So the pieces that you saw is Alice Supreme, Alice Freeman Engineer, and this is Alice White Dog. And some of you will hear Du Bois and some other histories. And what I headed to in terms of trying to continue to break the machine was, what is getting liberated here? It's a wild AI, it's an alien love, it's ruptured borders, it's a liberation project. So I show them as paintings. So that's Alice Supreme at like 4x4. And in training that first set, I then thought, well, let's build, a worldview. So I started to make kinship, and I built in oceans, ocean creatures, and that changed color and form. But to me, when I brought them to the framers, I was like, oh, don't they look like relatives? And the framers like, no, but I'm like, obviously they're relatives. So that's Nikanj, which comes more specifically, these words, these alien creatures from the kind of Butler pantheon. Oloi, which is the type of third-party alien that allows for reproduction. And this is Zoo, and the rest of it is trisyllable Latin word that I'm not going to try to say. And so just building through these generations, again, back out toward the analog, partly because I think we're somewhat screen blind, like it's very, very hard for us to see anything distinct on a screen anymore for the reasons that you know. And then also trying to puzzle through what does it mean when you have series of things. One of the things about making things with machines, and this is a long history of mechanical reproduction, is often many things can get made very quickly, whether it's the photographic or it's cars. So just trying to think through when we can always make a lot more, what does it mean to cull and to curate and to create constraints around things. So this is just a description of the GAN and the kind of constraints that I was thinking about, and I'm going to move it so quickly you can't read it. This is literally the kind of thing that was getting produced in 2014 from GANs, so I wasn't joking in terms of like it really is like the middle ground. I feel a little bad saying that because they look like nice synthetic people, but you also, I think, can follow my point. Okay, so the last series is the BPP landscape, and this is different than the two portrait series where I'm taking landscapes or what happens, and that's it.
Thanks so much, everyone. And perhaps you can leave the last image up for, as a background for us. Thank you so much. So all of you work with current AI tools, or more current AI tools, let's put it that way, in very different ways, with very different results across media. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you together, from photography to painting to speculative fictions, to building your own models, predicting graves. And coming back to this idea of AI art having no creativity because you basically put in a prompt, and you made some jokes about the bad results you're getting from it. Where does creativity reside for each of you in your processes? And I realize those processes are also very different. What are we talking about when we say creativity in art or in the AI art you're creating, and how is meaning locked into it, given those different approaches? Mimi, do you want to start and we go down?
I don't want to start. No, I really don't want to. Does anyone else want to?
I know you have so much to say about it.
Let me see. I mean, part of why I didn't want to start is because I think there's so many different places you can go with a question like this. And so I wanted someone else to do the work of like plotting the points that I could jump around it. But I think for me, it's one of, I guess I'm used to working within a lot of different mediums and with a lot of different tools. And so there is a way in which, though I understand what you're saying, Beth, we've seen a lot of boring AI art for sure. But there's also a way that I don't find it to be so much of a question where the creativity lies, because I'm like, it seems clear to me. It's in so many different parts of this process. It's all about how you approach it, in fact, even in the boring work, that tells you quite a lot about the artist, And I find that very useful. I think, Like what we do is we're like the lenses, and then the tool is another one, and you put these different lenses on top of each other, and then the light is kind of divided in different ways. And I find that interesting. So yeah, it's a bit abstract, but I would say that at various points in the process, in the same way that, I don't know if I'm using, I would say that it lies in so many different parts of it.
Anyone else before I plot out more points to jump around?
I mean, creativity is a very malleable word.
Yeah.
It can mean so many different things. As I said, I'm almost entirely concerned with pictorial images. I'm a pictorialist, I'm an image maker. So where creativity impacts, let's say, a conceptual scheme or something, I mean, there's a million ways in which, as Mimi said, the creativity could occur. In my case, I think of creativity, whether it's painting or writing, whatever, as a choice, a set of choices. You're confronted with, there's a vocabulary, pictorial, literary, cinematic, and within that vocabulary, there are conventions, and at a certain juncture, there'll be a choice. If you're very alert, that you'll notice the choice can be made. Sometimes it's just inverting word order or turning an image upside down. What I call creativity is that alertness and that awareness of the opportunity afforded by a decision juncture that involves something normative or non-normative. So I have no problem with it occurring with AI or any other system of image generation. And I think actually what you said, Mimi, is very interesting, that even something that's not very wonderful to look at still has something about the personality of the maker. But you grasp the personality of that individual through their choices. So if this can lead to a more particularized, alert feeling, then that feels like creativity to me.
Yeah, if we're talking about alertness and awareness in decision making, I would suggest that process is different in working with AI systems than making a mark on canvas or pointing a camera at something. So that is precisely what I'm getting to, Beth.
Yeah, but there's also when a technology is new and it's still a technology, but cameras are still technology, but there's a way in which some kind of the witchcraft and the magic of it is removed, especially even now that they're digital. You're like, how is it a camera even? But I was just thinking about the Aaron exhibition and what you said earlier in terms of there had to be intention, like the designer, the artist, and the scientist said there has to be intention. And there's a way in which, and maybe you'll totally disagree, is I kind of feel like the work that we've been talking about, even though it's quite different, there's a different intention. There's a way in which I do talk about the system as a collaboration, because there's enough that happens. I mean, let's not pretend like I get to decide everything, because you get to curate what the thing is, and but there are aspects of the operation that I don't know. I mean, maybe it's chance operation or another kind of form of like just what I call it probability, and it seems a bit different intention than creating an apparatus that, I don't know, produces a line for you in a particular way? And I don't know, I mean, Mimi, are you making an apparatus that traces graves for you in a way? Like, do you feel at all like connected with the Aaron project?
Yes, but maybe not for that reason. Yeah, I think that, you know, different tools make different types of work possible too. And I agree. I think the comments about intentionality, choices, it feels very tied to what David was saying, intention and choices, and coming and thinking about creativity here. I think that those are great points to put in the ground. Yeah, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, in some ways I find I find the focus on creativity less interesting than some of the other focuses on, do you know, like more, I'm interested in the pieces, I'm interested in the process. I'm less interested in charting where the creativity happens, I would say.
Yeah, by creativity, I also mean more meaning. And Beth, in your book, you talk about how meaning is locked into a system. And I think that happens at very different levels in very different ways. And that is often something that is not seen in the discussion of AI art. It's simply like, oh, this is not creative. It's a text prompt, or it generates like results in the uncanny valley. You know, Bennett, do you?
I'm with you. I find the question very difficult to wrap my head around. Like, how can you imagine there not being creativity in it? I mean, it's a tool. It's a new tool. We're at the very beginning of it. It's a moment to be curious about it all. It could do extraordinary things, and if someone were to take the premise that this thing, it is an impossibility for creativity, for this to be applied in a creative, meaningful way, would be pretty silly, you know? So it's an enormous blank canvas, and I don't think that I know any better than anybody else what the world's gonna look like in 5 minutes, but one thing that I think I do know is that there'll be a lot of surprises, that the ways that people will be using this in the very near future and are right now with everybody on stage. It's new, it's fresh, and I think it's going to reveal that there's a kind of creative locked-in syndrome that's about to end for many people to whom this medium makes real tangible sense.
Yeah. Also meant more as a provocation, basically, how do we even start to think about this in terms of these systems? I also had some more specific questions for all of you, since you once again work with different systems in very different ways. Mimi, you have done, as you said yourself, used so many different ones and engaged with AI and vision systems in very different ways. You also did a book on AI for the people, which you're currently revising. Can you talk a little bit more about the function of that? And
Yeah, sure, of course. And also, I'll say, Bennett, when you were talking, it made me think about the word originality, which I find maybe more useful than creativity in thinking about some of the outputs of working with these different models. Maybe that's something or specificity. Those are things I think I'm really interested in. Anyway, but the book, yes. So one of the other things I do is I have an organization where with an artist called Mother Cyborg / Diana, and we make materials that help people make sense of technology, but in a way that is very accessible. It's called A People's Guide to Tech. And back in 2017, I think, 2018, we wrote and published this guide called A People's Guide to AI. And it was great. It was like, we wrote this thing. It was, like I said, very accessible. It had this popular education approach, and it has been in many different places. we ended up, now we're working on a re-release of that. That is a new version of it that's really meant to tackle this moment. At the time when we were writing it, a lot of conversations about AI had to do with civic spaces. And now a lot of them have to do with creative spaces. You kind of charted this really nicely when you were talking about these different AI summers and winters. So we've changed it a little bit, and so we have this new version that's coming out. We also, something that has happened in the meantime is that someone stole our guide, which I think is kind of interesting in that we give our guide away for free. We also sell it for like $5. And we have a PDF online. Someone took the PDF, downloaded it, and then racked up the price by three times, and then started selling it around, which actually says something about the buzz around AI in this moment, that they were able to do that and people bought it, even though, again, it is free online, you don't have to. But that's another thing. So maybe that ties back to this question of creativity, originality. Even without the machines, even without the models, we have to worry about a lack of that. But yeah, we do have this guide that's out. If anyone is interested in learning more about AI, or you want a very accessible, easy way to encounter it, you can find that. It's just called A People's Guide to AI. And the new version will be out later this year.
So something to look out for, and also addressing current systems, switching registers. Bennett, your work really builds this connection between an early stage of AI technology. You used the early version of DALL-E when it came out. The images you created they can't even be created anymore with the current version, and you nicely built this connection between vintage photography and the evolution of these systems. Given that so much AI is really focused on photorealism, going overboard with that, how do you, it's a speculative question, but how do you see it affecting the medium of photography in general, which most people seem to be most concerned about, because so many of these models really aim for photorealism in a very different way than the work you're all creating here.
I'll play along, but I do have to say that I think by temperament, don't try to get too deep into these questions, because I'm just a person who is excited by a medium, and there's a longing involved, and there's a mystery to the thing, and there's a process which unfolds, and like anything that I've ever done sort of teaches you how to do that thing. Every film that I've made has sort of taught me how to make that film, hopefully in time, But I think it's very natural to look at, for example, the stuff that I've been making, which looks a lot like photographs, and to compare it to the familiar, and to weigh these things against each other. But these are not photographs, It's a different medium. And I mean, for a million reasons. And you're not in the room with the thing. The thing doesn't even exist. Like you were saying, it's every medium could do something else. So like watercolors.
It's quite interesting, Bennett, because every photograph that's ever been taken communicates the essential I was there-ness. I saw this, I was there, I happen to have a camera. And your images don't do that. But we still want to reach for the photographic inside the image. I wonder if that's just because of 150 years of acculturation.
The problem with a lot of old photography is that you don't believe it, Like I find that works of Edward Curtis, very beautiful. He was unbelievably sophisticated in his techniques, and he took a lot of photographs of indigenous people. But there's something, it's like a person. You believe, you trust them or you don't. And we also know that these. I don't want to be putting the guy down. He did an incredible thing, but they're staged, and I feel it. And thought, well, kind of curious about these people. I feel like they're sort of hiding behind some dude's idea of what they are. And can the thing be shook up a little bit to see something which is true, that these are people who have had lives that you actually cannot fathom. There's a mystery to it, and there's something lost that's unreachable. And being able to go back and maybe with some little bit of irony, if that's the right word, use a technology that to do this, that is going to be responsible for accelerating the same phenomena. I think we are closer, I feel closer to the people in these images than I think the near future will feel to us, so.
So I've got a weird Curtis anecdote. I was like, oh, wait, that's crazy you said that. So there's a group of historical selfies that were produced with the diffusion engine. And so this was a couple clicks back, maybe 2 years ago. And they were selfies of moments that were pre-photographic. So a bunch of Aztec grinning at the camera, some conquistadors, some samurai, and then a group of native warriors. And the thing that the makers talked about on their Reddit feed was, it makes history so relatable. These people are just like us. And that's the part, thank you, that's the part where you're like, fuck. So in looking at that, I don't know, then put some of the Curtis portraits, or one in particular, of a group of historical Indian chiefs, and it's real in the sense of it is really a photograph. There really is a material imprint and light and bodies, and there's trickery that can happen even at that age of photography, but there's a sense of real to it. But to your point, the way that the men, the chiefs, are posed, the way they're standing, it is a very particular type of portrait, and one does not get the sense that this is, I don't know how to say it, but they're presented in a certain way. And there's still a little bit more kind of agency in terms of the subjects, where they're not grinning at the camera, but it just, I was
It's
like,
somebody else's choice, and it obscures something about them that you wish you could know, or you wish you could think you could even glean something.
Yeah, and the history of photography has plenty of that, but I guess one of the questions is, obviously we think that there's something exciting and fun here. Otherwise we wouldn't. Yeah. There's something exciting and fun here, but I just want to know, the universal selfie, back in time, and people are excited about it.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think one of the big cognitive disconnects of AI and its relationship to photography, to go for this photorealistic, authentic kind of image in a medium that simply could not deliver that. I want to be very mindful of time and also open it up for a little bit to questions from the audience, online and on-site.
Can I use this? Okay, thank you. So we have microphones for those in the room, but we have, I thought we have, since I promised the online audience we take a question, I have one that I think is great, and I'd love to hear your answer. So this is from Sonia, who asks, so much of what we love about art involves critique. So I'm wondering how one preserves or deploys critique by using the tools of AI. Is there a way to use the tools of AI while critiquing it? How does one do that? And I feel like you've kind of in different ways touched on that, but I liked how that sort of put a fine point on it. So I wondered if you would speak to that, and then we can take some questions in the room.
I said I want to bring perfect machine. How much more critique?
Critique is in the eye of the beholder, anyway.
I think it's embedded in what you're doing. Each and every one of you is doing. To Megan's point, I think this is critical engagement with the technology in terms of highlighting its potential, its shortcomings, its beauty, and where originality resides. So that would be my question.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for your time and for this great conversation. First of all, I must give kudos to this speech-to-text software. I don't know what that is,
It's
but
a
it's probably one of the
person.
best I've ever seen.
It's a person.
Somebody's, that makes sense. Kudos to that person because his real-time typing and editing skills are incredible.
So much for AI.
I really thought it was an AI software, but okay, question. Could be for anyone, but I might pose this question directly to Mr. Miller. And I understand from Sam Altman that one of the desires and a goal for ChatGPT model, maybe even for DALL-E, is to really understand the user and personalize with the user per se. And I'm curious if you saw that DALL-E started to understand your style of what you're looking for, and maybe from first picture to, let's say, 50th picture that you created, did you feel like it took less number of prompts? Does that capability even exist today?
It does, especially if you're designing your own model. So, but I didn't feel that so much. I felt sort of the opposite. Like, I need to figure out what words mean to it. And a lot of the prompts that get you in or do not read like poetry at all. You end up being kind of tricky and trial and error and stuff like that. And then in my process, I very quickly get off of the text, and you can manipulate the image in different ways, especially erasing sections, seeing patterns which you can anticipate. The AI will also see, and you can coax it into something. But it's more like, what happened to you? You've changed, is my feeling about a lot of the AIs. And over a few years I've been using DALL-E, I'm like, I don't recognize you anymore. Was it something I prompted? Like, what is? So, having said that, the capacity for machine learning to become so individualized, to comprehend something about you and to predict things that one might imagine cannot be predicted, not just what products you might want, I am certain surpasses almost everybody's idea of what it can do. And I want to talk to you more afterwards about this because it relates to some insane projects where you can do these things, and the questions that you ask it will unleash the potentialities of these things. So I'm not a fear monger or anything like that, but if you want to know, can these things do that? Yeah, will it change us and how we create and create a sort of self? All of that's going to be part of the medium. I don't, good, bad, whatever, but that will be the case.
It's me. Hi, thank you so much. I have a question that's more around the future of crediting. And when you mentioned, David, the name of the person you're working with, I found that very interesting. Obviously, when it comes to film, there's a huge amount of transparency. There's 10-minute credits at the end for every single person that ever worked on a film. Very different in the capacity of art. So in the future of, I guess, crediting and criticism, I wrote down the name of that person because I'm like, where is he? What is he doing? Is he working with other people? If you build a model with him and you want to protect this model, or how do you feel about the transparency of I mean, engineers are probably loving this. They're suddenly, people are in demand of their attention. Just, yeah, what is your opinion on being transparent about the engineer and then working with them exclusively?
Well, I said right at the beginning, I could not have done this on my own. I don't even know what an algorithm is, really. I remember when I was a million years ago, when I was in art school, Richard Serra came to talk at my school, and Richard had, even then, was kind of well known for having a studio full of friends, like-minded people, some from other disciplines, musicians, Phil Glass, for example, who helped him make his work. And one person asked him about that. How come you don't credit these other people when these sculptures are obviously the product of many hands? Richard said something that I thought was very cogent. He said, anything that comes out of my studio is mine. Now, you could say, well, that's just wildly egomaniacal. But in another level, it's just accurate. It's just factual that, yes, a studio production could be a group project. I mean, this is my case, not a group project. I'm working with one other person. However, it wouldn't have happened in anyone else's studio. It would not have happened even next door, or even in, a year earlier or a year from now. The specificity of it is all. And if something has the requisite specificity to give us the feeling of art, then I think it probably has one author. Maybe that author had some helpers. I mean, quite almost universally that's the case. Some credited, some not. And I'm very happy to acknowledge Grant as he's been indispensable. However, it's not his art, and I'm pretty clear about that. I think it's fine for people to know there's a team, if there is a team. And I think film is the obvious example. You're correct that there's one director, but there's a lot of other people involved. We always say it's a Bennett Miller film, when there were many people working to help get the film made. I don't know what to say about that. It's probably a social convention, an industry convention. However, I think the answer is the specificity one, that within that lies an identity which is probably not really a group identity. Now, I'm not sure that answers your question now, does it?
And to quickly add to that, it's a much discussed issue in digital art where those relationships frequently happen and people work with big teams. It's always a fine line to negotiate, but that's also where the distinction between David Salle and someone else as opposed to with comes from, with the with indicating that there is someone who played a role maybe in creating a model, but is not fully on the level of the collaborator or created the art. And that can change from project to project. Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, whose work I quickly referenced, she tweeted yesterday that she wanted people to credit themselves for their prompt and her model if they used the images.
Yeah, at a certain point, I mean, this is a pretty fun and funny example. The notion of credit breaks down because one of the social missions of the technology is accessibility. And if it's accessible to everyone, who cares whose prompt authored that gizmo? You know what I mean? So there will come a point, or maybe we're here now, where the notion of authorship is itself shape-shifty and is subjected to some other kind of expectations. When that happens, it'll be interesting, and I'm not even opposed to it, but I think it's a separate phenomenon.
But do you
Can we
care
do
about
one
the
more?
data? I thought that you were going to ask that question. I was like, you want to know what's in the data. I mean, David said what was in his training data, and his paintings, the training data is him, and that works out really well. Super ethical, but was that interesting for you as well in terms of not just the humans in the room, but how are these systems working?
Yeah, I mean, I'm super interested. Yeah, I was very interested, obviously, in the process of how it all came together. It's just that the criticism's only coming toward. It's a lot easier to criticize what you're seeing visually, and no one's saying, well, what a shitty data set, or how terrible is this? That people don't have the skill to understand that, but it's so easy to come and critique the visual. So if something is excelling or working in the way that the artist who created the entire project, then you just have to accept that if it's out, then that's the goal or the visual that they were looking at. So I'm more interested in the output, I would say, but I'm interested in the process.
I think this is an interesting question from all of the different sides of this conversation, actually, from the tech side, from the art side, I guess those are the main two sides. I think, in a way, it's like I agree with some things you've said, David. I also kind of disagree. I think that credit and authorship are just two completely different things. And I think the film world does it so well, enlisting everyone who was involved, and yet it's still very obvious. Sometimes when I make a piece, I'm like, I'm the director of this piece. But someone's gonna help me with these other things, and they did their thing well. But the end decision is on me. And I feel like you can do that while still giving credit. I think that's very possible. And then I think it kind of mirrors this issue in the tech that Beth was kind of tapping at, this question of the data. Where does that come from? Which is also being grappled with the very models that we're talking about, you know? I mean, look at these lawsuits that are going on right now where New York Times and then lots of different artists as well are trying to fight this question of, do we get credit? These generative models are based on our work, and they only work well if they're based on high quality data. If you have these models, if they're trained on the data they produce, they break down. It has to be on data that people have created. And I think that is a really important point. And yet there's this tension too, because the data of one, when you have your own model, when you're training on your own stuff, that's amazing. It's the best one-to-one complete system. But when you're training on these millions of data sets, it can be hard to separate out the role that one person's work plays versus the entire group. And that's to me quite interesting. There's a lot there that's worth teasing apart. And I think it does require us to have to refine some of our definitions around credit and we said, credit and authorship and the different roles that are played and what they mean. And I think that in a world where we can just talk about creativity, I was talking about the boat and the current, we can talk about creativity all we want, but there's a whole market behind this. There's a whole world that we're not even really talking about. And the credit becomes relevant when you consider all of those deeper levels too. So I think it's a question that gets at some of the heart of this too.
I just have to say that film credits do not always get it right.
Okay. Can we take one more, Megan, or do we have to? Yeah.
We have one more. Yeah. Oh, we have time for one more. Although after this conversation, now I have so many more questions. But this question, and maybe none of you are even thinking about it, but are you all confirmed in your convictions that AI will remain only a medium? And what I mean by that, I am a professor, I teach at NYU, and my students have been working with AI. And one thing that we explore in this class is, could the Turing test ultimately be a machine that makes us laugh, for example, because language is so complex? And one of my students started working with ChatGPT and presented a project, 60 pages of conversation with ChatGPT. Finally, he gets to a moment when ChatGPT, who is not embodied like we are, so of course the humor is not going to be the same as ours ultimately if it has some kind of consciousness. And when he gets to this point where ChatGPT is actually making reference to its own positionality in time and space, then it makes a good joke and tells a story. So how do you all feel? Because Bennett, you don't recognize Dali right now, right? From several iterations. So when it starts to change, will it and could it change into something where it is making things more related to its position in reality?
Yeah, of course. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
And especially if it's...
But is it still a medium then? Is it still a tool?
Yeah,
Is it still a medium?
Of course it is. First of all, if it's also training on its own output, then you're moving ever more in that direction. But yeah, you're asking, can this be used to
Use itself. I think at that point the answer would simply depend on who's the audience. The audience will decide if it's funny, synthetic humor. Great.
Is it relevant?
Is someone enjoying it or using it? That's fine. But I think that's probably going to happen soon.
So Jeff Hinton has said that clearly these systems are intelligent. And he's talking about ChatGPT and not even the latest iteration. Maybe it was the latest iteration. So in the fall, he said, I know it's intelligent. He's not saying sentient, but he's saying intelligent because it can explain why a joke is funny. When they can start telling their own jokes, then maybe we're at a different moment. And you named it in terms of a certain kind of awareness. And what language do we have for this other than self-awareness? So we're definitely tripping into that space.
Also,
I have a way less mystified approach to it. I recently had a studio visit with an artist who actually trained a model of GPT-4, which is a much more neutered version than the previous ones. And lo and behold, had a sense of humor. And it was, how on earth did you get to that level? And it was excessive training. And what she basically boxed out of it was any kind of literal association. So she got to that point of making jokes by getting the literal out of it and letting it perform more associative. And that's where humor suddenly entered.
You mean
system.
removing the literal? Removing the literal.
Removing the literal,
But can I just say, though, that you're still just talking about predictive technology.
Of course.
We were talking earlier about you'll be amazed at the things that it can predict.
Yeah.
That's what it's doing. It's predicting your reaction. It's predicting something that's going to create, a reaction. And if it involves generating an illusion of a self to do it, it's going to hit the target eventually.
Yeah.
They're super intelligent.
Yeah.
They're not conscious. They never will be.
But so much
Anyone
of
who
what
wants
makes
to argue about that afterwards, I did not say that glibly.
But so much of what makes something funny is the delivery. So I'm sure it can do nice Borscht Belt delivery too.
One of the, early geniuses in the field of AI, Marvin Minsky, wrote a paper about it and said AI will not be truly intelligent until it can be funny. And it's like a 50-page paper or something, which is fascinating, written in like the 60s or something like that. But to appreciate how sophisticated that is to be funny, I recommend the paper.
We have to wrap it up here. I think we already ran over time. So once again, huge thanks to all of you for participating. Huge thanks for the audience to come out. Thanks for your great questions. And to be continued, obviously, we only scratched the surface. Thank you.